3, 2. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my Diné people, Yate. My name is Tommy Lewis Jr. I serve as the Superintendent of Schools for the Navajo Nation under Department of Diné Education. I'm here to talk with you about some work that we are doing within the department that will bring about some major changes in the field of education. I'm going to first talk about the way education is at the moment before I get into some historical initiatives that has brought us to this point. Okay, there are 260 schools on Navajo, serving approximately 89,000 students, kindergarten through 12th grade. Majority of these students are within the public school system in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. When the Treaty of 1868 was signed, the government obligated itself that it will provide education for our children. For every 30 students, there will be a teacher. And from the very beginning, they started to live up to their treaty obligation, and they had some very difficult time from the beginning, I'm very sure, because there was the infrastructure here on Navajo was not there. There was probably dirt roads only, no technology, no transportation system, things of that nature. And so they started with practically scratch. And because they were struggling, they called on the churches to come in and help them. And along the ways, they began to experience more hardship. And so the plan was that maybe if the Diné people were put through this education system and learned the white man's way, eventually we would be acculturated into the white man's society. And they did all kinds of things by taking us off the reservation to off-reservation schools like in Anadarko and Chilocco, and Phoenix and Albuquerque. And they also devised what they call a 5-year program where they thought that the Diné people were only good with their hands, and so they told us that you need to be a baker, you need to be a carpenter, you need to be a welder. They thought that that's all that we could do. So they never really challenged our children that if they were given more reading, more math, that they could become engineers. So the government struggled with all of those things early on, and it began to be apparent that they were having a hard time. So in 1921, the Snyder Act came out by the United States Congress, and this one had to do with Indian health care. The government said, look at the number of Indian people dying throughout the country because of malnutrition, because of disease, because of sickness and all. So the government realized that they had a big problem on their hand. In 1928, the Marion Report, which investigated the U.S. Indian policy failures, all of the treaty obligations and other things were really not working out. So it got United States Congress attention that things are just getting worse on Indian country. Then in 1934, the Johnson-O'Malley Act came about, which is federal monies to meet the special and unique educational needs for Indian children attending public schools throughout the country. In 1940, Impact Aid came about, which is money in lieu of property taxes that public schools would receive, because public schools basically operate under property tax. And being on tribal land, we don't pay property tax. So the federal government puts up money to help with the tuition costs and other costs associated with educating Indian children. And in 1969, a special Senate subcommittee on Indian education issues a report called Indian Education, a National Tragedy, a National Challenge. This was spearheaded by the late Senator Ted Kennedy, and it came out with some very interesting information, again, that education is just really behind for Indian people, Indian kids are just getting further behind on the academic achievement. Very few are being graduated through high school. Very few are even getting into higher education. So it was alarming. On account of that, the Congress established the Indian Education Act. They established the Office of Indian Education, and a National Advisory Council on Indian Education was established in 1992. We had some Diné people appointed to this council, and currently Dr. Deborah Dennison is the chair of the National Advisory Council on Indian Education. In 1974, the act was amended, and it included a teacher training program and a fellowship program. There was a program called Teacher Corps being implemented nationwide, which was to produce more highly qualified teachers, and it did its job. A lot of people on Navajo went through NAU and got their teacher certification. In 1976, the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act came because of the outcry that Indian people said that, hey, the government is failing, I have a plan, I can help myself, give me the money, and I can use that money effectively to take care of the problems in my community. And so the Navajo people were there lobbying heavily to make sure that this law was put in place, and it really began to make things roll for the Diné people. Navajo was the first tribe that contracted for law enforcement and social services using this brand new law in 1976. And since then, other Indian tribes have used it effectively to bring in other programs under the authority of the tribal governments. And it's still working today because of the Indian Self-Determination Law. Public Law 95561 came about in 1978. This law gave some authority to BIE school boards. Okay, prior to that, the local school boards were primarily advisory to the principal, and the principal would always have the upper hand, and people didn't take their work seriously. It seemed like it was just a gathering to talk about general issues, not specifically about making decisions, hard decisions about teaching and learning that will impact children. And so because the BIE had all of the educational system under their control, with the board only being advisory, this law here, with the help of Diné people was very instrumental in making sure that the law passed, and we actually crafted language that was put into legislation for the United States Congress to pass, and there's a big movement on Navajo among the Navajo Area School Board Association members, the local school board, and the outcome was great. Everybody celebrated that. Now we have some authority, but the majority of the authority still lied with the BIA, but it was a start. The key word is consultation. Prior to that, the local principal could make a decision without even informing anybody behind closed doors, and that was just the way they did business back then. Sometimes the principal would engage local communities, and very seldomly they did that. But majority of the time, they kind of ran the show themselves. And the BIE dominated all of education for all these years. It was not until 1958 that the first public school district evolved on Navajo through Winter Rock Unified School District. The following year, Tuba City Unified School District evolved. And so since that time, they had some competition. And over the years, the perception of the Diné people is that public school is doing a better job. So the parents made a decision that maybe they need to put their children over into a school system that is better organized, that is better structure, better policy, more money, and all. So a majority of them went that way, and it reduced the enrollment for the federal schools. And so right now, only 15% of the total Navajo children are in the BIE school system. And 10 years later, in 1988, Public Law 100-297 was passed by Congress. Again, the Net people played a major role in getting this law in place. And it was another major accomplishment, which gave more authority to local school boards. And there, the local board is in charge. They contract with the government. The money comes directly to the local school. And the board hires an administrator. They have the legal and fiduciary responsibility to oversee the education through an elected board established by the Navajo election policies. And in 1974, another piece of law called Reauthorization of Indian Education as Title IX, Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. 2001 is when the No Child Left Behind came about under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That law says that all schools throughout the country will have students at 100% proficiency in reading and math by 2014. That didn't happen nationally. It failed for many reasons. A lot of schools on Navajo failed. There's only a handful that made what was called the AYP, how it was calculated through the state standardized testing. And so at this point in time, the BIE, Bureau of Indian Education, is beginning to realize that maybe they need help. And more recently, within the last 2 years, there was a study group put together by the Assistant Secretary for Interior, because they getting information in Washington that something's wrong with the educational system on Indian reservation. Look at the high dropout rate. Look at the low academic achievement rate. Look at the low parental involvement rate. This is not right. Something's got to happen here. So they went around and asked Indian communities, what's the problem here? How can we help you? How can we make it better? Indian people across the country, including Dinesh, says, hey, we need more authority. We need more involvement. We want to have control of our children's education. That's the only way that it'll work. What you have here, we found out, is not in our best interests. And for that reason, that's how these low numbers came about. So within the last couple of years, I guess they reevaluated their position, and now they said, okay, maybe I should back off. Maybe I should only be technical advisors to Indian tribes. Maybe Indian people need to be more responsible. Maybe they need to be more involved and given the authority. And so it was through the federal government, through the Department of Interior, starting with the President of the United States, President Obama, and through Congress and through Department of Interior, this single grant concept evolved. And it was first presented to the Navajo Nation Council in 2010. And people read about it in the paper. We didn't really know what it was about. But it means maybe putting together all of those monies that will impact Indian children. We're only talking about the 32 schools that are still under the BIE. They're fully BIE operated. Years ago, we used to call them BIA boarding schools. Some of us went through that system. I'm one. I'm proud of it. I learned something that put me where I'm at today. And so through the years, all of that effort began to be questioned. Okay, is this the best system? Probably not, because of all the low numbers. And so the government gave us some monies to do a feasibility study, whether or not the Navajo Nation can assume authority over these 32 BIE-operated schools. There's a number of them still out there in local communities on Navajo. So those are the ones that is being proposed by the government, that maybe the Navajo Nation should take over these schools and devise a new system to how they will be transferred under the Navajo Nation's authority. So a feasibility study was made by expert consultants from around the country. They took a look at the BIE or public school system, and they made a determination it is possible. The Navajo Nation can assume responsibility. They have a government. They have a law called Navajo Nation Sovereignty and Education Act that says at some point in time we will have a department similar to a state department of education. Similar powers, similar authority that a state department of education has regarding all of the schools on Navajo. At some point in time, all 266 will probably be underneath it. I don't know when it will happen, but that is the goal. But for the time being, we're working on these 32 schools to be transferred over. The feasibility study was done. It says it is possible. A framework was put together as to how it could be done, and that through that study, 3 areas were identified as needing a lot of attention, which is governance, human resources, finance. Those are the 3 areas that we're taking a look at right now. We brought in expert consultants, and it seems like things are beginning to look more clearer, and we're working on building a plan as to how this transfer will possibly happen. And the grant that we have under the Sovereignty and Education Grant from the Bureau of Indian Education will expire in September 2016. Hopefully by that time we will have looked at most everything and put together a plan as to how we're going to transfer over. The discussion right now is that maybe it would be better to put these 32 schools under one system, one finance policy, one governance policy, one HR policy. And it's a huge undertaking. It's going to take a tremendous amount of work. And we're calling on people from the state public schools, tribal government, grant school, BIE schools, and others to help us build this Navajo education system. That's what we're doing. We're building our own education system through this initiative. And we never had this opportunity from way back. The government's brought in their system, and we just thought that that was what the way it's done, so we just followed. Now we're beginning to see that it's probably not the best system. So the thinking is that we can do better. Let's do better as Navajo people. Let's build our own system to where it really includes everything that needs to be taught in schools. The whole intent is that next year we're going to concentrate on working on the curriculum. And that is going to include a number of people, educators, professional teachers, professional administrators, and others, to really concentrate on how we're going to design that curriculum and academic accountability. Thought is that if we infuse language and culture, infuse culture and language, it might work better for our Navajo children, where they will learn about the beauty and sacredness of life, the values about be strong, don't be lazy, be happy, be determined, be motivated. That's what our Navajo teaching is all about. And so we're hoping that if we infuse that kind, it might motivate young people. So that's what we're embarking on. It's a tremendous undertaking. I want to share this information with our Navajo audience, that this is something, in my view, is doable, and we have to be optimistic. Yes, there are some people out there that have a problem with this. Some of them are saying that we can't do it. Some of them are saying, leave it alone. The system is okay. Why change? But then again, if you look at the data on low academic achievement year after year, is that good enough? Are we happy with that? When students go through the system right now, and they graduate from high school, 12th grade, those students have a hard time scoring high enough in ACT or SACT scores to where they can't get into the university system. Some of them have to take remedial courses for several years before they get into engineering or law or whatever degree, and it becomes very frustrating. There's enough blame to go around among the whole educational community. So through this undertaking, we're hoping that we build a better system to where when we know that a child enters Head Start, 13 years later, we know that they'll be graduating at 100% proficiency in all content areas, all areas, to where they can take that test and get right into careers or get right into higher education. So, ladies and gentlemen, my people, this is Tommy Lewis again, talking with you from Department of Education. I represent the Navajo Nation Board of Education, and I really would like for our Navajo people to pay attention to what we're doing. We need your support. We need your involvement. We have this golden opportunity to do something for ourselves, and I think that it's something that we have to do. It's that important. Education is very serious business. So I encourage everybody to tune in and get our minds together, put our hearts together, and come up with something very beautiful that will be good in place for the next 100 years. Thank you very much.